Hi, Elisa from Inky Rocks here. In today's video, the last of the year, we will be covering Japan's pen trends of 2019. I'm fortunate enough to know both Bruno Taut of Cronicas Estilograficas and Jacob of Fudefan. They have both put out blogs today about Japan's pen trends of this past year. I have links to their blog posts below. They will be discussing the points from their blog, and I will be rounding out their presentation with some insights from Dan Zoot of ZootInks.com and C.Y. Chow of TokyoStationPens. Jacob is Fudefan in both an IG account and his blog. He has lived in Japan for 15 years and is fluent in Japanese. Being media savvy and fluent in Japanese makes it so that Jacob knows what's going on the pen scene in Japan. On both his blog and his IG account, he has a calendar of events, of pen events that are going on in Japan. I frequently refer to this schedule and am often asking him questions like, hey, what time does this start? Or hey, when is this happening? So basically, Jacob is the English speaker here that knows what's going on in Japan.
So let's talk about the trends this year, starting with ink. So last year in 2018, people talked a lot about Numa or ink swamp, which is this obsession with ink in our pen community here that we've seen for the last few years. Because last year it seemed like we were at the peak in Numa. There were more inks released than you could even possibly keep up with and buy. So at least I thought that we were, it can't go on like this, but I was completely wrong because this year it got even deeper. So not only did we have more ink to buy, there were more brands entering the market. We also had more opportunities to buy ink. So first of all, at the big Tokyo Pen Show, that was as much of an ink show as a pen show. There were a lot of booths selling, limited edition sailors, mainly sailors actually, and there were smaller retail events throughout the year. There were brand-specific events throughout the year, and then there was Bungu Joshi Inku Numa, and Bungu Joshi Inku Numa was this paradise for ink lovers because here you had all of these, or many of these retailers across Japan that sell exclusive inks, your Kobayashi, Pentonote, Usagiya, Kawasaki Bungu 10, Joyful, they all came together in Tokyo. So finally you could buy all of these inks in one place, because either for us here in Japan it can be hard to buy those inks. You have to go to some fairly remote places. So that event was hugely popular, and I think that was like the culmination of the Inku Numa this year. Most of the time when you talk about ink in Japan, you mean sailor, because this is really their game. They own the limited ink genre. But there's one more brand that has really made a splash in Japan this year, and it's not even a Japanese brand. It's a Korean brand, and it's not Colorverse. It's not Three Oysters, but it's Tono Lims. I think they launched earlier this year. They had a small lineup of like 10 or so inks, and they seemed nice, but they didn't really stand out at first. But since then, what they have done, and what they have done so successfully, is that they have worked with the retailers across Japan and done limited edition exclusive inks with them. So now you have Tono Lims inks from Kobayashi, from End Paper, from Shokido, from Helico, from Hirayama Mandendo, and from many others. They've also worked with event organizers like the Kobe Pen Summit and with Tainan Pen Show and made inks for them. They've also worked with ink producer Ken Takeda and done an exclusive line with him. They've also expanded their own standard line with, for example, shimmering inks and fluorescent inks, and even inks that have both of these two properties, so shimmering and fluorescent inks. And it seems like it has worked because you see a lot of Tono Lims now. You see it online, you also see it offline in the retail stores. And That's a very impressive feat in just 1 year to go from nothing to one of the most visible inks. So that is my ink trends.
Bruno Taut of Cronicas Estilograficas is our counterpoint. Cronicas Estilograficas is probably one of the older fountain pen blogs online. Bruno's main interests are vintage Japanese pens, and he's a pro. The first time I met him, I was telling him about buying a Pilot Mew off of Instagram. He looked at the pen and said I had paid too much for it. He told me the year it was manufactured and what factory it was manufactured in. There may be someone out there that knows more about Japanese vintage pens than Bruno, but they probably don't speak English as well as he does.
Ink, again, very negative, I am, is more colors, more expensive, and that's it. So yeah, there are plenty of colors nowadays, but like, okay, maybe we have to look at old inks, no? So Yamamoto used to be, I mean, this is Hiroshizuku, it used to be expensive, and now it's cheap. Then Tono Lims comes with this color, and it's exactly the same, twice as expensive. It's like, what's the point? So maybe the radical thing to do is to go back to the basic ink lines of Pilot or Sailor, which for 400 yen you find 30 mils of a perfectly usable, nice ink, water resistant if you want, with a Pilot Blue Black, for just 400 yen, even cheaper if you go to some discount shops. So I don't see the point of having 100 colors, well, 100. If there were only 100 colors, it's like 200 colors for very expensive. You know? Anyway, that's the trend, and I wonder how long it can stay like this.
Dan Zoot of ZootInk.com has been in one of my videos before about the Tokyo International Pen Show. Between being fluent in Japanese and having a job that takes him all over rural Japan, Dan has visited many of the small stationery shops that have their own exclusive inks. He is pretty much, well, the expert on Japanese inks.
For inks for the year, I don't know what the reason is, but I think that pink was probably the color that really, in my mind, sets the year apart. Many companies released a pink. Almost all companies in Japan have a pink in their lineup. Bungukan Kobayashi has 2. They released a new pink this year, which is kind of similar to Ink Studio 237. It's called Sakura Gozen. They're Sailor-based inks, so they have very good behavior. But many different companies. Kingdom Note came out with a pink in the Sea Cow series, the Umi Ushi series. Mont Blanc had at least 2 that I know of, 2 pinks. The pink, the pearl one, the Marilyn Monroe one, I think, and also Pop Pink. Gourmet Pens Pink by Ackerman for the Gourmet Pens lady, Aziza. Usagiya in Okayama-ken came out with Meditai, which is sort of in the pink. It's kind of in that squishy realm of like orange, pink, red, orange, pink, vermilion, but that one. Taccia came out with the lip color series of 5 pinks. So that, anyway, there's a lot out there, and it seems like a lot of companies took the advantage of a perceived a resurgence of pink or something, and there's tons of them out there. As far as packaging goes, Taccia, Ukiyo-e series, the Hokusai or the Sharaku boxes, which are aesthetically it's just a square box, but they have a really nice like design, like the prints on the outside, and they also protect the bottle of ink in a unique way in that they're sort of cushioned the way that they put the box together. And the box is bigger than the ink. You know, one of the things I always think about the Sailor bottles, the new Sailor boxes for the squarish Sailor bottles, is that it seems like if you got bumped into something, it could break or something like that. So the Taccia box is aesthetically wonderful, and also it seems like it would protect the ink bottle a little bit better. So that's one of my favorites. Also, I want to mention about a conversation I had with the ink blender Osamu Ishimaru when I spoke to him at the first tips, which is when they around the time that they released, actually it was the same year they released the Ink Studio 100 Ink series. I was asking him about the how he came up with the 100 inks and about some of the more high-profile ones that have gotten a lot of attention, like 123 and 162. When I asked him, how did you come up with 123? And he says, well, I didn't come up with 123. I mean, it was an accident. You know, the fact that it was the way that it is. And I asked him, well, how did you come up with the inks? And he said, well, the whole 100 series, it was a challenge. They asked me inside my company to, is it possible to come up with 100 unique inks that would all be nice inks that people would like? And so what he said he did was he used a statistical approach, a mathematical statistical approach based on the types of colors that people ask for. He's made, at this point, 20,000 inks for customers in the Ink Studio event that he's done over the years at the different stores in Japan. And he hasn't, the 100 series doesn't include any inks that are particular customers, because he treats those as that individual's specific property, and he even gives you a card that has the number and has your name on it, and you can't ask him to make someone else's ink. And he said that the 100 ink series contains absolutely not one single ink made by any customer, because they're those customers' private property. But based on what people have tended to ask for and their elements or their components, he did a statistical analysis and came up with what became those 100 inks. Not one single one of them has a story behind it. They're just the numbers, and they're just the ones that are the ones that people find remarkable are purely accidents. 162, 123 is what he said. But
when you talk about pens, you know, you have your three big Japanese manufacturers, but you only really see one of them, especially at shows like Tokyo Pen Show. Every booth has their sparkly Sailor Pro gear. You don't see much of Platinum, you don't see much of Pilot. And it's understandable, because they haven't released that much recently. You haven't seen that much from them. But I think we're starting to see signs that both Platinum and Pilot are doing more for, you know, the pen community, more of the type of releases that our enthusiast community like. So Platinum, their Rocket release was very popular. They did an orange limited edition for Nagasawa. They did a US exclusive called Carnelian, I believe. More recently they did the 6 Star Wars pens. And even more recently, they announced the Godzilla edition that's going to come out in May next year. And Pilot, they started the year with a not so interesting release, the Custom NS. But then they released 20 different Decimo colors. It may be Japan exclusive, I'm not sure, but 20 different colors. They also announced a whole new capless model. So not just a different colorway, but a whole new model called Custom LS. And they have refreshed the Custom 74 and 91 lines with new colors. They've introduced a red Urushi pen. So I think we're seeing more interesting releases from both of those brands as well. But the bigger trend in Japan, I think, is that you see more Chinese pens. You always had the Hero pens and the Jinhao pens at, you know, Amazon and so on. But this year you could find Chinese pens in retail stores. In particular, there's a brand called Kako, a new Chinese brand called Kako. They have official Japanese distribution. You can find them at big retail stores. You can also find something called Fonte, which is basically a rebranded Jinhao. So it's like a Monteverde, Monza kind of thing. And if you go online, if you go to Amazon, even if you search for Sailor or Platinum, you're going to get pages after pages of Moonman, of Pen BBS, of Wingsang, of D-like. You always had a little bit of that, but it's just much more now than before. Also, the Japanese pen doctors like Shishikura-san and Mori-san from Wagner, they're both saying that they get Chinese pens from customers to repair now. One more interesting thing is that at this year's Kobe pen show, you could buy pens directly from Pen BBS. So Baini from Pen BBS went to Kobe and sold her pens there. And it may be the first time ever, at least outside China, where you could buy Pen BBS pens directly over the counter from Pen BBS. And it's easy to understand why these Chinese pens are popular, right? They are very affordable. Some of them have these beautiful acrylic bodies. The quality is getting better, especially the nibs are getting better. Some of them have very interesting filling systems. You have, your piston fillers, your draw fillers, your vac fillers, your syringe fillers, and so on. So I think that is something you're going to see more and more of, the Chinese pens becoming more mainstream, because that's what's happened. And that sort of brings me to what I think are my the three pens I selected this year for most representative of the trends this year. So starting with this Chinese pen, so this is a Wingsang 3013. It's a $4 vac filler, and you look at the design, you see there's clear inspiration from Twisby. But again, this is a $4 pen, and it's not actually that bad. It's pretty good. The filling system works. The pen is what we call a pilot style steel nib. Actually, this particular one has a pilot nib on it, but it takes pilot style steel nibs, and it just works for $4. The other pen I will pick is a Sparkler Sailor, because you're gonna have to have a Sparkler Sailor in your selection this year. And the one I picked is from Kobayashi, and this is one is called Shizuoka T. The reason why I'm picking it is that I think Kobayashi is one of the most popular retailers, or at least their sailor inks and their sailor pens are among the most popular here. So in the West, you hear mostly about Bungubox. I think that's the retailer that's most famous in the West. But in Japan, when you go to these, you go to the pen shows and you go to these ink events, there's always, the longest line is always the Kobayashi. They are just the most sought after pens and inks, and I think this is a good representation of what they do so well. Finally, I will pick a pen that's not really sort of representative of the trends, but more of my own personal pick. So I have been really much into urushi this year. I got a number of pens done by Bokumondoh, urushi artist Bokumondoh. This is the most recent one I got urushi decorated. So the base pen is a Lotus Pen. It's a custom design based on a vintage pen by legendary pen maker Sakai Eisuke. And on top of that, Bokumondoh has done a so-called hineri nuri finish, which is these twisted patterns. So you see these green twisted patterns. On top of that, there's something new that Bokumondoh has just started doing called, it is aluminum powder. So she has sprinkled aluminum powder on top of the hineri nuri and then polished it. And I think the result is just stunning. It's a very striking pen, and it's one of my absolute favorite pens already. So that's my trends and my selection this year.
Thanks.
In the pen scene, well, I don't see much of interest in Japan right now. Everything that has happened in Japan in this 2019 is rehashing of well-known pens. So Sailor keeps on releasing the same pen over and over and over again, just new colors, new sparks, but nothing that is radically new, not even mildly new. The exception to this rule might be Pilot releasing the very uninteresting custom NS at the beginning of the year. And more interesting, but thinking of next year, 2020, is the capless LS, which with a new mechanism for releasing the nib. Those are the only interesting pens, one more than the other. On its side, Platinum, despite celebrating the 100th anniversary, has released nothing new. The Prime is just basically a 3776. The new Star Wars pens are again 3776 in fancy colors with fancy characters and giving a lot of money to Disney. So I mean, pen-wise, it's nothing new. It's just rehashing of well-known, sometimes 10-year-old pens that have not much to offer to the market. On its side, it seems that Chinese pens are becoming a lot more active. Chinese brands are becoming more active, more proactive, easy to buy, easy to find, even on retail shops nowadays, with interesting filling systems, with even some exotic nibs. Maybe Fude nibs are not that exotic in Japan, but for the Western market is really a novelty. So I'm not very optimistic about how this is going on in Japan, and I think that Japanese brands should react, because the low-end market is going to be taken over by Chinese brands.
So, pens for the year. I want to say that my number one favorite pen of the year, I think the most noteworthy pen of the year, is the Franklin Christoph 46. What I love about this pen, it holds a converter. It has a number 6 nib. But if you get the black one, it's a very good candidate for being lacquered by another craftsman. And I did that with this, and it's a perfect candidate for being lacquered by Miss Makino from Bokumondoh. The other thing is that it comes out, on the website in only a few colors. But if you go to a show, there's a lot more colors. Because it's big, it's not that heavy, but it's a solid, has a solid feel to it, and they do an excellent job with the nibs. One of them has an Audrey Sig, which is wonderful. The next one is the Blue Sirius. This is Dr. Shishikura, Pen Dr. Shishikura's Sailor Professional Gear base pen, which has a zoom nib. She sells them with a variety of nibs, but this one came out, I want to say, in February. It's a blue, translucent blue base with the largest size lame that Sailor will make, the largest size glitter that Sailor will give you. It has these milky white, sort of opalescent finials that have some glitter in them as well. You have to go to her clinic, which is held at multiple locations around Japan many times a year, in order to buy it. And she said that the glitter is higher cost than the others because Sailor had to make the glitter specially, because there's possibly no other Sailor pen that has glitter of that density and size. About pens in general for 2019, I think that one thing that defined the year was a lot of different manufacturers started putting out pens that have glitter in the bodies, and ones that we didn't see before. The Pelikan came out with an M205 Star Ruby, which has 4 different colors of glitter in the body, which is, I believe, history making. I don't think they've ever released a pen with glitter before. Platinum released the Carnelian 3776. That was also a departure from at least what I know to be their history. The Franklin Christoph 46 Diamond Cast Blue and the Diamond Cast Green. The Nagasawa Special Edition pens all have some size of glitter. A lot of companies are doing pens with glitter in the body, and it's not just Sailor.
CY is our resident Dr. Frankenpen. I don't think he owns a single pen that's straight, normal from the factory. And today he'll be talking about pen modification as a trend. It's something he's very good at and very familiar with.
And that's what I want to talk about today as my trend of 2019. Obviously, aftermarket modifications and customizations has always existed in the pen market, but I think this year what I've noticed is a lot of people are taking things now into their own hands and really attempting the modification by themselves, myself included. And I think that it's really indicative of the experience of using a pen to make it really truly personalized to you. And with that, I think one of the things that I've seen is that not only is aftermarket modification being more popular, but also the people who offer these services are really starting to come out. So for example, Nagahara now is retiring from Pilot to set up his own studio so that he can work on more pens from different customers. You see Pen Realm on Reddit create a separate Reddit account for his modifications and his services, and we see a breakout year for Pactagon, who studied in Osaka for a while, working also with Nagahara. So I think there's a lot of new opportunities. I think this is really exciting for the market. And then on top of that, you of course have the Urushi artist Bokumondoh, who has now exploded in popularity. It's just fantastic that people are now discovering new avenues to connect with their writing, but also connect with the experience of writing, with the experience of holding something that's special and personalized to that person. Here I have a Stipula, where I modified the nib and feed again with the vintage 146 split ebonite feed, a Pilot 15 FA nib, which I modified for extra softness, and then on top of that I modified the barrel a bit to increase the ink flow for a piston filling pen. And then lastly, this pen is not mine, but it's one of the sparkly sailors that have been so popular this year, so I think it deserves a mention. This is Silent Night the Third from Bungu Box, with their classic Ink Tells More motif on the trim here, the cap band, a snowflake motif on the finial. And what's interesting about this pen for me is that it's a Realo, and we don't get to see too many custom or these kind of sparkly store exclusive Realos out there. I think there's this one, and then I think Nagasawa does one with the Kobe Fire Force. On here, I'm told that this nib is 21K. It doesn't have 21K stamped anywhere, and it started its life as a music nib, which I have turned into a Naginata nib here. To close out, I think customization is going to get more and more popular. We can find F, M, and Bs everywhere, but even as Pelikan has started to reintroduce their IB and their BB nibs, Mont Blanc has come out with their flex nib options on both the 146 and the 149. You're going to see a lot more variation again in nib types now that the fountain pen community has gotten bigger. More people are more used to writing with fountain pens. Of course, it's still quite a small portion of the population, but I think now the market has developed enough that we can have many more choices out there in terms of nib sizes, nib customizations, and I think we'll see more of that in 2020.
Paper. I wanted to talk about paper because paper is becoming scarce and it's becoming more expensive. And good paper, fountain pen quality paper or fountain pen friendly paper is becoming scarce and expensive. I think that the economy of scale here is playing a very important role, and the pen community is small and cannot generate the demand to make this quality paper cheaper. It's interesting to see this writing pad by Yamamoto Paper, which is a collection of fountain pen friendly paper, and on it explains how some of the paper mills that generated some of this are out of business. So we are having I think this is going to be an interesting issue in the next years. Pen events. Well, the most interesting event in Tokyo, probably in Japan, was the Tokyo International Pen Show, which is not a pen show. It's a stationery salon where there are no pens. So there are sailor pens, new sailor pens, and a couple of, 3 traders selling vintage pens. In any event, this was a very successful pen show that attracted, and the most interesting feature, or the most interesting feature was that it attracted people from overseas. It attracted people from the US, from Australia, from Europe to a pen show that was not a pen show. That's the interesting the paradox. Japan and maybe Philippines or even Singapore, not so much Taiwan, are generating a new concept of the pen show, and it's here to stay. So we should not look at the pen shows in East Asia as we look at the pen shows in America or in Europe, which are more pen oriented. This is stationery oriented. Finally, social media. I'm new to it. I started on Instagram last year, well, by the end of 2018, but I became more active in 2019, sorry. Well, it has a very interesting, has the ability to connect the community across borders. And now everybody knows what is going on in Japan and what is going on in Europe or what is going on in the States. And then closing the borders through exclusive companies to distribute in certain market is becoming less and less reasonable because you can just buy online. And that is something that Japanese brands, the big three Japanese brands, have not yet understood. They are not active on social media. Their activity is very minimal and very regular. And on the contrary, Chinese companies are becoming very active. Chinese and Taiwan, which is another way of being Chinese, are becoming very active in the media, and they are becoming very successful through that. So that is my take on 2019. Probably quite pessimistic. Not much of interest. Rehash, and more inks more expensive, less paper more expensive, and well, new phenomena in social events and social media.
I'd like to leave with something that made me happy this year, my 149 that was Bokumondoh, and leave you with a sim choi, a Chinese mythical three-legged toad sitting on top of a coin that's supposed to bring you riches. My brown agate toad and I wish you a very happy new year full of riches.